I never thought I'd find myself in a real estate bidding war with the president of our homeowners association, but life has a funny way of turning the tables when you least expect it. My name is Alex, and until 6 months ago I was living peacefully in Oak Ridge Estates, a quaint subdivision with manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses that all looked suspiciously similar, except for one, Karen Wilkins' massive corner lot mansion that somehow got approved despite violating half the neighborhood's architectural guidelines. I first met Karen at a neighborhood welcome event when I moved in 3 years ago. She approached me with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to Oak Ridge Estates," she said, handing me a binder the size of a phone book. "This is our HOA handbook. I suggest you read it cover to cover before you even think about planting a flower or changing your mailbox." I thanked her politely, but something in her tone made me instantly wary. Little did I know that this woman would later try to auction off my house over a garden dispute. It all started with my front yard vegetable garden. I had been growing tomatoes, bell peppers, and herbs in neat, well-maintained raised beds. According to the HOA handbook, yes, I actually read the thing, there was nothing explicitly prohibiting vegetable gardens as long as they were maintained in a neat and orderly fashion. Mine was immaculate. I even installed a decorative fence around it that matched the neighborhood aesthetic. One Tuesday afternoon, I returned home from my job as a high school math teacher to find a violation notice taped to my front door. "Unauthorized agricultural activity in violation of Section 8.4, it read. I checked the handbook again. Section 8.4 spoke vaguely about appropriate landscaping, but said nothing about prohibiting vegetables. When I called the HOA office, guess who answered? Karen herself, who happened to be not just a board member but the president. "Those vegetable plants are an eyesore," she said with a sniff that somehow carried through the phone. "The board has determined that appropriate landscaping means ornamental plants only. You have 7 days to remove that garden or face a fine." I tried to reason with her. "Karen, there's nothing in the rules specifically prohibiting vegetable gardens. Mine is well maintained and actually enhances the property value." "The board has made its decision," she replied. "And just so you know, I've received several complaints about it." She hung up before I could ask who had complained. The following week, I attended the HOA meeting to plead my case. As I entered the community center, the room fell silent. 5 board members, including Karen at the center, sat at a long table facing rows of chairs occupied by a handful of neighbors. I recognized most of them as friends who had actually complimented my garden and even asked for tomatoes. "We're here to discuss the unauthorized vegetable garden at 684 Maple Drive," Karen announced, not even bothering to acknowledge me by name. "The homeowner has requested to address the board." I presented my case calmly, pointing out the lack of specific prohibitions against vegetable gardens in the handbook, showing photos of my well-maintained yard, and even bringing letters from 3 neighbors who appreciated the garden. I thought I'd made a compelling argument. Karen's face remained impassive as she called for a vote. "All in favor of requiring the removal of the vegetable garden at 684 Maple Drive?" 4 hands went up immediately. Karen's shot up first, followed by 3 board members who I later learned were her close friends from the neighborhood bridge club. Only one board member, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Peterson, abstained. "The motion passes," Karen declared with barely concealed satisfaction. "You have 14 days to remove the garden and return the yard to its original state, or you'll be fined $100 per day." I was stunned but determined to fight back. I consulted a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes, and he confirmed what I suspected. They couldn't enforce a rule that wasn't explicitly stated in the covenant. He wrote a strongly worded letter to the board, and I thought that would be the end of it. But Karen was just getting started. Instead of backing down, she orchestrated an emergency board meeting where they officially amended the handbook to specifically prohibit food-producing plants in front-facing yards. The change would take effect in 30 days, which meant my garden was still technically allowed until then. What I didn't know was that Karen had been monitoring my HOA dues payments with hawk-like precision. Due to an error with my bank's autopay system, My quarterly dues payment of $350 had failed to process. I hadn't noticed because I never received the late notice. Karen later claimed it must have been lost in the mail. 3 months after our initial confrontation, I returned home from school to find a certified letter informing me that due to persistent violations and failure to pay dues, the HOA was placing a lien on my property. If I didn't pay the outstanding balance, which had somehow ballooned to over $3,000 with late fees and administrative costs, within 30 days, they would begin foreclosure proceedings. I was floored. I immediately called my lawyer, who explained that in our state, HOAs do have the power to foreclose on homes for unpaid dues, but the amount seemed excessive and the timeline unusually accelerated. He advised me to pay the amount under protest while we fought it legally. The next day I went to the HOA office with my checkbook, determined to clear this up. Karen was there, of course. "I'm here to pay my allegedly overdue balance," I said, trying to keep my voice level. Karen slid a statement across the desk with a smile that could curdle milk. "Actually, there's been an update. The board has assessed additional fines for your continued violation of the landscaping rule. But the new rule doesn't take effect for another 2 weeks," I protested. "We've determined that your failure to begin remediation constitutes an ongoing violation of the spirit of the regulations," she replied smoothly. "The total due is now $5,800. This was absurd. I wrote the check anyway, handed it to her, and said, "This is paid under protest. My lawyer will be contacting you." Karen took the check and placed it in a drawer without looking at it. "You should know, Alex, that the board doesn't respond well to threats. Perhaps if you'd been more cooperative from the beginning." The next few weeks were a nightmare of legal consultations and documentation gathering. My lawyer discovered that Karen had been selectively enforcing rules throughout the neighborhood. Her friends could have whatever they wanted on their properties, while people she disliked faced constant scrutiny and violation notices. Then came the bombshell. Despite having paid the disputed amount, I received another certified letter informing me that due to a processing error, my payment had not been properly credited and the HOA was proceeding with foreclosure. My house would be auctioned in 30 days. I was beyond furious. My lawyer filed an emergency injunction, but the judge assigned to the case was out on medical leave and we couldn't get a hearing date before the auction. It seemed like everything was working against me. That's when I had my epiphany. If they were determined to auction my house, I couldn't stop them, but I could control who bought it. And I knew exactly whose house I wanted to target in return. You see, during my investigation, I'd discovered something interesting about Karen's perfect corner lot mansion. She had refinanced 3 times in the past 5 years and was actually underwater on her mortgage. More importantly, she too had missed an HOA payment, her own, during a 2-month vacation to Europe. Of course, she had quietly waived her own late fees. I contacted my parents, who had been looking to downsize from their large suburban home. They agreed to lend me the equity from their house to ensure I'd have enough cash for the auction. Meanwhile, I did some digging and found that Karen had violated at least 7 different HOA rules with her own property, from an unauthorized pool house extension to a fence that was 8 inches higher than regulations allowed. On the day of the auction, I arrived early and sat in the back. Karen was there, looking smug as the auctioneer explained the proceedings. My house, which I had bought for $380,000 and had paid down to a mortgage of $300,000, was going to be auctioned with a starting bid of just $150,000, basically the outstanding mortgage plus the disputed HOA fees. When the bidding started, Karen didn't participate directly. Instead, a man I recognized as her brother-in-law made the first bid. A few other investors jumped in, and the price quickly rose to $200,000, then $225,000, then $250,000. At $275,000, only Karen's brother-in-law and 1 investor remained. That's when I raised my paddle and bid $300,000, exactly what I still owed on my mortgage. Karen's head whipped around, her eyes widening as she recognized me. Her brother-in-law bid $310,000. I immediately countered with $320,000. The investor dropped out. It was just me and Karen's proxy now. He bid $330,000. I went to $350,000. He hesitated, looked at Karen, who nodded frantically, and bid $360. I calmly raised my paddle one last time. $375,000. Karen's brother-in-law looked at her again. She shook her head slightly. They hadn't planned to go this high. The auctioneer called once, twice, and then a third time before declaring, "Sold for $375,000. I had just bought back my own house for slightly less than I had originally paid for it. As I went to complete the paperwork, Karen marched over, her face flushed with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed. "Buying a house," I replied calmly, "and now that I'm officially the new owner, I'd like to report several violations by the HOA president." Her face paled. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about selective enforcement of rules, procedural violations in filing the lien against my property, and failure to properly notice the membership about rule changes," I said. "My lawyer has already documented everything." But that's just the beginning. The real plan was already in motion. Using the documentation I'd gathered about Karen's mortgage situation and her own HOA violations, my lawyer had filed complaints with both the State Real Estate Commission and the County Records Office. More importantly, he had used these same violations to convince two other homeowners who had been bullied by Karen to join in a petition for a special board election. 2 weeks after buying back my own house, I attended a special HOA meeting where Karen was struggling to maintain order. Over half the neighborhood had shown up after receiving my detailed letter about Karen's abuses of power. When she tried to adjourn the meeting without addressing the allegations, Mr. Peterson, the one board member who had abstained from the vote against my garden, stood up. "Point of order," he said firmly. "According to our bylaws, if 20% of homeowners petition for a special election, we must hold one. I have a petition here signed by 38% of our members." Karen looked like she might explode. "This is ridiculous. We can't have special elections every time someone gets their feelings hurt over proper enforcement of the rules." "Actually," I said, standing up, "the petition isn't just about a special election. It's also about filing a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office regarding misappropriation of HOA funds." A hush fell over the room. I continued. "Financial records show that over the past 2 years, the HOA has paid $14,000 to Wilkins Landscaping for common area maintenance. Would that be the company owned by your husband, Karen?" She spluttered. That's perfectly legal. We disclosed the relationship." "To the board, perhaps," I replied, "but not to the general membership as required by state law. And you participated in those votes, which is a clear conflict of interest." The meeting erupted into chaos. Neighbors who had suffered under Karen's regime began sharing their own stories. By the end of the night, an emergency vote had been held, and Karen was removed from the board by a margin of 86%. As she gathered her things to leave, I approached her one last time. "Oh, and Karen, I found some interesting information about your corner lot mansion while doing research." She froze. "What about it?" "Well, it seems you're behind on your dues too. 3 months, to be exact, and according to the strict enforcement procedures you yourself put in place, the HOA is obligated to place a lien on your property immediately." Karen's face drained of color as she realized what was happening. "You wouldn't dare." I smiled. "I'm not doing anything. I'm just ensuring the rules are applied equally to everyone, exactly as you always insisted." I handed her a notice identical to the one she had given me months ago. "You have 30 days to pay the balance of $7,423, which includes your missed payments and the same administrative fees you charged me." "This is absurd. I'll fight this," she sputtered, her voice rising to a pitch that made several nearby neighbors turn to watch. "You're welcome to try," I said calmly, "but unlike my case, yours is pretty straightforward. You didn't pay, and we have bank records proving it." "Where would I get that kind of money on such short notice?" she demanded, her indignation giving way to the first signs of panic. I shrugged. "I hear house auctions can be quite lucrative. In fact, I might even be interested in bidding." The look of absolute horror that spread across Karen's face as she finally understood my endgame was worth every moment of stress she had caused me over the past year. She stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, as the reality sank in that the very system of petty tyranny she had created was about to consume her.